president will be extremely bold. All signs seem to point to that. The resumption of proximity talks, which would lead to direct negotiations, which after a decent interval and what the lawyers would call due diligence on the part of George Mitchell, could easily lead to an American plan. And an American plan and an American set of parameters that goes beyond what Bill Clinton put on the table in December of 2000. That's always a possibility. Could it have an impact in changing the nature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over time? Perhaps. Will it lead to an immediate acceptance by either Israel or the Palestinian Authority in their respective circumstances? The answer to that is no. At best, it will lead to a yes, but, which will then lead to additional negotiation. But I'm not here to say no. I'm here to create a cautionary tale about what's possible and what isn't. Let me make a couple comments about Lebanon. I've always been wary, Abdullah knows it, about American intervention here, because for a long time I looked at Lebanon as having been dealt a very cruel hand, both by history and by geography. After all, there are two factors that no nation, well, there's one factor that no nation can change, and that is where it is. You have been dealt a very cruel hand by history, by nature here. You are sandwiched between the Mediterranean and two powers, much stronger than you are, who will never allow their national interests to somehow be subordinate to yours. So where you are creates an inherently difficult situation, which no American government has ever been able, or frankly, at times willing to try to alter. The second is what you are. I actually have been amazed over the course of the last 2 days. We met with the president, we met with the prime minister, we met with Speaker Berry, of how extraordinary the nature of the political system with all of its imperfections is. I used to believe, and I don't believe it any longer, that what you were, that is to say, minorities who sought refuge, unwilling to surrender power to the state so that the state would willingly exercise it on your behalf, the creation of a militia culture, would never allow the kind of peace and stability and prosperity to be evident here. I'm not so sure anymore of that. I think the problem of where you are is much more severe than the problem of what you are, because what I've seen created, and there is a price to be paid, in exchange for a good measure of political paralysis and indecision, you now have a security situation and an economy which are really quite impressive. Having never been here for more than a day, even in 3 days of walking and watching and driving around Beirut and talking to people, it's really quite impressive. You have an extraordinary thing here, enterprise. Aside from its beauty and the compelling nature of what has been created here, it's remarkable if you can keep it, if you can preserve it. So it's not the what so much anymore, and I realize the difficulties that exist here politically, and the realignments and the readjustments that have to be made to realities here. And in a way, that's the cruelest and most difficult challenge you face, that you have to align yourselves and readjust to certain realities. The world is not the way you want it to be here. You have to deal with the world the way it is. And that requires compromises, that requires decisions, which to some degree require reconciling morality and ethics with history and politics, which is never easy. Never easy. So it's not the what so much that concerns me, but the where. And as I mentioned to Abdullah earlier, my own assessment is that there is danger because you are at the acute point of vulnerability for regional trends and developments? I see four, and I do not want to comment in detail about them. I didn't come here to make news. I came here to help advise a group of Americans who want to learn more about Lebanon. But there are four factors. First is the Obama initiative, which may come in 2010. What will the reaction be? Don't pray for anything you really don't want. That's a very interesting expression. Don't pray for anything you really don't want. And an American peace initiative might be positive in some respects and welcomed in certain quarters, but it will not be welcomed in others. And there will be pushback, as there always is, when the forces of peacemaking intersect with the forces of resistance. That's number one. Number two is the tribunal. I have nothing to say on this issue. I'm not familiar enough with its details or its contours. But it is a conundrum. It's a conundrum. It's a problem without, as I see it, an easy solution or an ending. That could also break in 2010. Third is Iran, and the reality that our policy with respect to either engagement or containment on the nuclear issue doesn't appear to be working. After 15 months, I have persuaded myself that there's only one country that will essentially stop or determine whether Iran acquires a nuclear weapon, and that's Iran. And that's Iran. Because Iran is a country driven by a profound sense of entitlement and a profound sense of insecurity. And if you look at the nuclear powers outside of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council who have had nuclear weapons for 50 years, the other several who have weapons are also countries driven by a profound sense of entitlement and a profound sense of insecurity. The North Koreans, the Indians, the Pakistanis, some would even put the Israelis in that category as well. And those countries will not be deterred. Well, we haven't been able to deter them, and they will not be deterred. So I raise this issue. If, in fact, engagement cannot work, if sanctions, even if they are imposed, are not sufficient disincentives, then you are now into what I call drift, deterioration, and the very real possibility of confrontation. And finally, there is the ever-present reality of your relationship or Israel's perception of Lebanon. I was just thinking about this, and we were talking about it in the meeting with the speaker. You know, and I run through the chronology, and it's a very unhappy chronology. 1978, 1982, 1993, 1996, 2006. This is also an element of the perfect storm, which could make itself felt in 2010. I mean, if the past is any predictor of the future. Now, I will say, it's probably the only piece of good news, well, actually, you heard maybe one more from me, that I do not believe, based on my own analysis, that this, and I realize the risks of what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. This need not be what I would describe to you as a hot summer, because the factors and forces that would shape such an Israeli-Hezbollah conflict confrontation, in my judgment, are not in place. Number one, you have a serious rift between the United States and Israel, which is only now beginning to be managed and semi-healed. Number two, we are involved in a very complicated America, the administration. There it is again, the we. The administration is involved in a major effort to create the diplomacy that leads to sanctions. The last thing it will want And the last thing any Israeli government will want to do is to provide a source of distraction or diversion during this particular period. And I mean that quite seriously. So you have a significant rift which neither side wants to make deeper. You have focus on sanctions and Iran. You have the reality that unless the Israelis have developed a response to opening up the box again, a unilateral strike in an effort to redress the balance of power, create a sense of deterrence, erode or destroy high trajectory weapons, all of that will have a response on them. And it's not a box, I would argue to you, they want to open right now. And with respect to Hezbollah, I would argue it's the mirror image. Middle East wars do not happen by coincidence. They are preceded by periods of tension. Sometimes they're not always perceived at the moment, but certainly in hindsight they are. I do not see the trail on this one leading to an explosion anytime soon. I realize the risks of making such a judgment. But if you asked me, and you didn't, I offered it in an unsolicited way, what my judgment is of this matter, because I know it is on everybody's minds. There's a certain quiet desperation, which is not so quiet here, as a consequence of the last several weeks, month now, of reports about missile deliveries and Scud Ds and saber rattling and very tough talk. I also believe the final factor is the uncertainty, even with the U.S.-Israeli relationship on the mend, of how this particular president would respond to an action that the Israelis might undertake that wasn't deemed sufficiently legitimate or wise. So that would be my best case scenario. How long of a period of quiet is maintained is another matter. But the notion that somehow, and this is worth ending on, the notion that somehow dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian problem, because this is what I hear, and I understand why, will somehow redound to Lebanon's immediate benefit, misses, it seems to me, the basic problem. Because there has been a realignment here. And with peacemaking comes obstruction. And unless certain parties are included in such a peacemaking effort, that obstruction will present itself very loudly. So I'm not entirely compelled by the logic that a major push to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian problem is without cost in an immediate sense to Lebanon, or frankly, any of the forces of moderation and centrism who see a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as I do, as in the best interests of the United States and regional stability. Let me close with one observation about a U.S. president. One U.S. president had an impact on me, Jack Kennedy. I was 12 when he was murdered. And anyone in my generation could tell you where they were when they heard the news of Jack Kennedy's assassination. The only reason I raised Jack Kennedy is Jack Kennedy described himself in a way that is really quite wonderful. And I leave it to you because it basically says everything that I feel. Kennedy described himself as an idealist without illusion. Idealism without illusion. If you ask me where I am right now, that's where I am. I can't give up on the prospects that Arab-Israeli peace can become a reality, but I refuse any longer to harbor the kinds of illusions that I harbored over many years on certain issues. America never understood the price that needed to be paid. The Israelis never understood the price that needed to be paid. The Palestinians never really understood the price that needed to be paid, and the Syrians never understood the price that needed to be paid. I would argue that the only party that really understood for the Lebanese. They alone understood the price that they would have to pay without a comprehensive solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Many of the people I'm with found it, they are not Middle East experts, very well educated, very involved, couldn't grasp the notion that Lebanon would probably have to be the last country to sign a peace treaty with Israel. But so it is because of, again, where you find yourselves. I did want to make a comment or two about the U.S.-Israeli relationship and domestic politics in the United States, because there's a great deal of misunderstanding. But why don't we go to questions and answers, and maybe we can get at it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron.